old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever Graying Jedi Podcast. I am Master Urza. Joining me, as always, is Lord Uther.
Thank you.
And our very own Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. Welcome.
Thank you, Masters. Thank you.
Good to be with you, my Jedi Council. And if you haven't guessed already, this is a podcast focusing on the world of Star Wars, those little Star Wars, and all of the fun that comes along with that. And of course, we have to launch into the newest Star Wars TV show out there, if you want to call it that, and that is Disney's Ahsoka. And I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I will probably slip in a few mispronunciations here and there. I've been trying not to call it Asuka, because that just rolls off the tongue so nicely. And Ahsoka, like Leviosa. But I'm really excited. I have to say, you may recognize us from a certain other podcast, but I'm excited to talk Star Wars. I am a lifelong Star Wars fan, although I would say that I think obviously I'm a bigger Star Trek fan. But Star Wars was probably my second big introduction into sci-fi as a whole. So very excited on my end. I know Lord Uther, Psyllium Maas, you guys have been lifelong sci-fi fans, lifelong Star Wars and Trek fans. I'm sure we're going to have some crossover here and some comparisons. But as we do on all good shows, we're going to turn this over to our resident Jedi Master, Psyllium Maas, for some exposition on Ahsoka and the Star Wars universe we're delving into. Take it away.
Thank you, Lord Urza. Thank you, Lord Uther. We will be discussing Ahsoka, the live-action representation of a figure that was introduced 15 years ago this month in animation. So the question is asked, who is Ahsoka Tano? Because if your familiarity with Star Wars was only the feature films that have been released beginning in 1977 all the way through 2019's The Rise of Skywalker, you would be forgiven if you were not completely familiar with this character. On August 10th, 2008, she made her debut in Star Wars The Clone Wars, which to this date is the only Star Wars property ever released by Warner Brothers Studios, because that was an animated show created by George Lucas and Dave Filoni, and it was airing on TNT, of all places, which was a Warner Brothers subsidiary. So Warner Brothers, for your bar trivia, the first 6 Star Wars movies were 20th Century Fox. The next 3 came from Disney, but there was a Warner Brothers iteration in there in 2008. The film was directed by Dave Filoni. He would then go on to be the supervising animator and director for the show. Ahsoka appeared in 6 out of the 7 seasons of the animated Clone Wars. She appeared in a season and a third of the follow-up animated series, Star Wars Rebels. She had a voiceover cameo in Rise of Skywalker. If you blink, you might have missed it, but she is one of the voices that appears to Rey in her moment of deepest concern. And she was recently featured in a miniseries on Disney Plus, Tales of the Jedi, 3 short episodes delving into her past and so on and so forth. She was also the feature of a young adult book, Ahsoka, which I highly recommend, also filling in some of the blanks by E.K. Johnston. She made her live-action debut in The Mandalorian Season 2 episode 13, simply titled The Jedi. And she also made a cameo in the Book of Boba Fett, episode 6, in which she appeared with Grogu and Luke Skywalker. As an animated character, and up until her live-action debut, she was voiced by Ashley Eckstein, who had the younger incarnations of Ahsoka. Ashley has gone on to design a whole line of women's clothing tailored for and designed for women for Star Wars. And you can find her work in the Disney parks as well as online. So you would say that she is a committed fan based on her experience voicing this character. So how did we get this character? Well, Dave Filoni, who was a Pittsburgh native, and he was an animator, and he was working on King of the Hill and Kim Possible, and then he directed the first season of Nickelodeon's Avatar: The Last Airbender. And George Lucas came to him and said, hey, do you want to come work on an animated Star Wars series with me at Lucasfilm? And of course, Dave Filoni said, I absolutely want to do that. And he said, great. So it's the Clone Wars. And Dave said, terrific. And he said, and it's going to follow Anakin and Obi-Wan and all the clone soldiers in their various adventures. He said, terrific. And he said, Anakin's going to have a Padawan. And Dave Filoni said, what? And George says, yes, Anakin has a Padawan. Between Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Anakin Skywalker was going to take on his own Jedi apprentice. And this was to fill in the emotional journey that Anakin that we see in Episode 2 is young and impetuous and brash, with the more measured military statesman that we see in Episode 3. And the brilliance of the Clone Wars series, to just take a moment for it, if you haven't had an opportunity to watch those episodes, is at the end of the live action Episode 2, the Clone Wars essentially kick off. And we said, like, all right, the galaxy is about to be, separatists versus clone soldiers and the Republic. And then when we pick up the action in Episode 3, 3 years later on the calendar, the wars are over. And we get the last desperate battle above the skies of Coruscant. And this show was really a way to kind of, again, well, what happened in between? And that's what Lucas intended to do. And he wanted Anakin to learn how to be more responsible and more grounded. And so this was the solution. So he gave him a 14-year-old girl, a Togruta, named Ahsoka Tano, as his Padawan. Now here's one problem that Dave Filoni saw right away. He didn't know how to write for a 14-year-old girl, and had no experience, therefore. So he decided, I'm going to write her as an accomplished Jedi, even with her youth, first, and not so much worry about the being a young, bratty teenage girl, if you will. And the fans responded early and often. Still, the internet was not quite what it was as it is now 15 years ago. But there were plenty of fan sites and message boards that were lit up when Ahsoka was introduced, because she was a 14-year-old bratty character, calling Anakin Sky Guy, and behaving as you might imagine that age group. Think of young Anakin in The Phantom Menace and how you felt about his performance there. That's kind of where it was tailored to. And the fans were very vocal initially. They did not like this character. Think Wesley Crusher in the early Next Generations. They wanted lightsaber battles and Imperial subterfuge, and they were not really interested in building this relationship. But Filoni and Ashley Eckstein said, be patient, we'll get there. And speaking as a fan myself, I was a little skeptical during those early years. It took approximately about the midway through the third season of the Clone Wars, which again went for a full 7. Midway through the third season, Ahsoka, the lightsabers flicked on, and you were able to embrace this character more and more. The writing for that character got stronger. The relationship between her, Anakin, and the clones got deeper. They started having her interact with other characters in the universe, including a fateful meeting with Chewbacca, before. And so then public opinion started to turn, and she particularly became a fan favorite amongst women. Because don't forget, this is before we had Rey, and we had all of these other female representation, let's say, in the saga. And young girls started, cosplaying as Ahsoka and dressing up as her for Halloween and so forth, and going to Comic Cons and such. And she really kind of took off, much like other shows had to find their way and their voice. She really became an indispensable part of the lore. Now, if you haven't watched the show, she's referred to as a Jedi. She was a Padawan learner, but she never became a Jedi Knight in the animated series. In season 5, she was accused of a murder in a very Hitchcockian sort of setup, and she went on trial. Now, she was innocent and eventually proved her innocence to the Jedi Council, but the suspicions and paranoia that she encountered while being on trial disillusioned her, and she walked away from Anakin and the Order and abandoned her path to becoming a Jedi. So while she has Force training, and while she does have all the skills of a Jedi Knight, if you're really going to look at her resume, she has never been a full Jedi Knight as far as the legend goes. And some of that storytelling after she left the Order is in the young adult novel Ahsoka. It is also in the Tales of the Jedi miniseries that you can find on Disney+. It's very difficult to make the transition from animation to live action. And so the decision was made, beginning with the Mandalorian's appearance, that they were going to bring these characters out of animation and into live action. And Rosario Dawson, an actress who has been working steadily in many things, most recently in Dope Sick, an excellent miniseries on Hulu, as well as countless feature films. She was chosen to play the live-action Ahsoka. And then other characters from the animated universe, many of them from Star Wars Rebels, which was a follow-up series to the Clone Wars, joined her. And in this show alone, we have Natasha Liu Bordizzo as Sabine Wren, a Mandalorian who was apparently, and this is new to everyone viewing this show, has some latent Force abilities of her own, and in fact, she at one point was Ahsoka's Padawan. We have Mary Elizabeth Winstead playing General Hera Syndulla from Rebels. Mary Elizabeth, you remember from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, a 2011 reboot of The Thing, and she played Lucy McLean in a couple of the more forgettable Die Hard sequels after the original Die Hard sequels there. And she's also married to Obi-Wan Kenobi himself, Ewan McGregor, so keeping it there in the family. Ray Stevenson plays the Dark Jedi Baylan Skoll, and you remember him from HBO's Rome and The Punisher, also the Thor franchise. He actually did some voice work in the animated series in the Clone Wars and Rebels. And sadly, we lost him earlier this year. And this was one of the final things that he was able to commit to camera. So the series is dedicated to Rey. He has a Padawan, a Dark Jedi. Ivana Sakno is playing Shin Hati, a Ukrainian actress with a very intense stare. We have Diana Lee Insanto, and her character was introduced to us in the episode that introduced Ahsoka in The Mandalorian. She is a witch of Dathomir who has supernatural abilities and is trying to locate Grand Admiral Thrawn, who was voiced in the animated world and will be played by the same actor, Lars Mikkelsen. And Lord Uther, and all of us remember Grand Admiral Thrawn from the very early 90s book saga written by Timothy Zahn, Heir to the Empire. And I think some of those plot points may be resurfacing here as we go along on our journey. David Tennant, who's been in Harry Potter and Doctor Who and just about anything you can think of. He is the voice of Yang, the lightsaber wielder, constructor, instructor, who accompanies Ahsoka on her missions. And we will soon be introduced to Esmond Esfandi, who is playing Ezra Bridger, who is the protagonist of the animated show Rebels, and who has a close connection with Sabine and Hera and Ahsoka, and has gone missing along with Grand Admiral Thrawn. And that's pretty much all you kind of have to need to know. What impressed me most about the show initially was I thought, as someone who was steeped in the lore, who had seen all of the animated shows, who had read the comic books, who had read the young adult books and so forth, I thought they did a very good job of giving you just enough to allow the story to move forward without having to get hung up on a tremendous amount of backstory and things like that. There were a lot of Easter eggs that I will want to go into at the end of the show that I personally, was gleeful when I saw them, that doesn't necessarily register with the casual fan and didn't need to in order to be enjoyed. I mean, for me, it was like, oh my gosh, look who that is and look where they are. And that's cool. But I was pleased that Dave Filoni, who wrote and directed this first episode, Master and Apprentice, I was pleased that they were able to find a way to not beat you over the head with, boy, you should have been watching 7 seasons of an animated show to figure out what was going on. So that my initial reaction was they found a middle ground that was equitable for fans. That is, casual Star Wars fans who check in every now and then the people like me who obsess over all the details. So I thought that was a big deal, and I was very happy with it. And I guess the first place I want to go to with this is sort of your initial thoughts, gentlemen, of the 2-episode premiere. It was Master and Apprentice, written and directed by Dave Filoni, and episode 2, Toil and Trouble, which was written by Dave Filoni. There is no writing staff on this show. It's all Dave Filoni all the time. So if you love it, he should get the credit, and if you're not so hot with it, then he should get the slings and arrows. But this is not a writer's room by committee. He very much is the sole architect in terms of what we're seeing on screen and where we're going forward with it. Episode 2 was directed by Steph Green, and a longtime television director who has worked on HBO's Watchmen and the Book of Boba Fett. And so that was episode 2. It was a 2-episode premiere, but I'm curious to my other Jedi Masters on the Council, just your initial thoughts, given that you probably didn't have as much background as I did going in. So what were you able to glean, or what puzzled you, or what kind of leapt out as, I want to know more, I hope they tell me more in the episodes to come. And I'm anxious to hear from Lord Uther and from Lord Urza. Take it away.
Well, I have to say I'm probably the most casual Star Wars fan here. I definitely grew up with 4, 5, and 6. Like that was, but I don't remember the guy in the king costume from the original, the original Jabba. I don't remember him. I remember the big worm, although I remember the big worm before the stupid added computer effects that came later. I actually I don't have the prop right now, but I have a VHS copy of the pre-altered versions, which, yes, I'm going to be digitizing because they're way better.
Han shot
but,
first.
Yeah, I've definitely kept up with the series pretty well. I mean, I was in the Star Wars Kids Book Club in the 90s when the revival re-releases came out. It was very popular in my school, so I signed up, and I think I only got like 2 or 3 books because I was poor and didn't have the money to buy them all. And I had like Attack on Thyphura and then another one, which was amazing. They were great stories. I love that I got more background to these movies that I love so much. And, of course, I watched the first 3 movies, so 1, 2, and 3, when they came out. I was at the theater for at least the first 2, within a week of them opening, of course. And I enjoyed them quite a bit, but, with time I learned to kind of hate them, and now I've kind of come back around to them, except Jake Lloyd's character I've always hated the entire time. But I had a huge crush on Natalie Portman, like everybody else my age. And Ewan McGregor is by far my favorite Star Wars actor of all time. Obi-Wan has always been my favorite character, even when he was, played by the old man, Alec McGuinness. But that was pretty much the extent of it until the 7, 8, and 9 movies came out. I didn't watch The Mandalorian when it started. I have gone back and watched it now, and I enjoy it very thoroughly. I watched part of the Book of Boba Fett, but to be honest, it didn't light my fire, so I kind of gave up about 3 episodes in. And I think I remember the Clone Wars coming out, but it was a cartoon. And I was in college. I had better things to drink at the time. So I found this to be very enjoyable. Kind of like the other Star Trek series that have come out on streaming, I feel like I've been able to just watch them and enjoy. I get to enjoy a lot of the actors that I've known from other things, like Dr. Taub from House makes a brief appearance in this episode, which was amazing. I love that actor. And like a lot of streaming shows now, everybody's really pretty. And being that this is a very female-led cast, I enjoyed watching that too. Not only were they superior actors, but they were very easy on the eyes, and so I can compliment them in more ways than one. And I'm not just singling out the females on the show. The males on the show are equally easy on the eyes, and of course the robots too, because I'm a robot freak, and I love technology. And the droids have always been kind of my closet fascination, is like how they can come up with all these different types of droids for one sci-fi series blows my mind. So I'm very enthralled by all those characters and all the different ways they seem to work them in. I do think it's a little bit on the cheap side that the dark side users on both The Mandalorian and basically all the Imperials we see on these shows have these like attack droids that have either lightsabers or seem to be so intimidating. And then, you get Luke Skywalker just like thrashes them all the way through until he like rescues our protagonist. But the first 2 episodes of the show I really enjoyed. I have to say it picked up. It gave me a good story. I won't say I was as hooked as I was with, say, A Strange New Worlds, but I definitely was very intrigued by the first episode. The only thing that kept me from hook, line, and sinker, I think, was Sabine. And because of the way the first episode concluded, I was like, oh, come on, not right away. And I could say the same thing about what happened in Marvel's Secret Invasion. That first episode and a certain character's outcome at the end of the episode really put me in like a bad taste in my mouth. Luckily, episode 2 launched at the same time. And we get this sort of like back to immersion recovery, which I've always really liked about Star Wars as well. So I'm like, okay, all right, you got me.
Long live the back to.
So yeah, I have to say, I as a casual fan, I feel really happy with what Dave Filoni's done here. I think the writing is very accessible. I don't feel like I need to have 8 years of animated series backup in my brain. And I actually didn't watch like the mini episodes they'd put out of the Tales of the Jedi because I didn't want to spoil anything. I met Ahsoka in The Mandalorian, and I really liked her character there. I think Rosario Dawson is a brilliant actor and absolutely stellar performance here. I love how Jedi she comes across as. That's one thing I feel like 7, 8, and 9 kind of destroyed in a way. She's very old Obi-Wan Jedi. And I loved Kenobi, but let's be honest, that Obi-Wan is a very different Obi-Wan from the Obi-Wan we first get. And Ahsoka really has that same vibe. She's a little more attitude under her belt, but I found that absolutely fascinating about this portrayal. So I'm really interested to see what happens next.
Yes. I think there's, well, where do I begin? I think there's a lot of potential. I think this might save Star Wars the way the first couple seasons of Mandalorian saved Star Wars. I think Star Wars was headed in the wrong direction. I mean, I love Andor, thought it was great. But I think our latest renditions of The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan I liked it, but it was okay. I feel like they were kind of pushing the limits a little bit in terms of how much people knew about Ben Kenobi. I thought he was supposed to be on Tatooine, and no one really knew about him until he saw Luke. So that was my only thing about Kenobi. I mean, I enjoyed it. Here I see a lot of potential. I mean, what I mean by that is I could see several different things happening here. I don't know the entire backstory. That I was a little put off at first. I'm like, this is basically a catch-up of Rebels, was my thought. But I still think they accomplished getting all that organized pretty, quickly and well. Here's my question. Because you bring up a great point there, Jedi Sifo-Dyas. What is it's? I don't think we really, unless it's in a book, which means you're gonna know it, Jedi Master. What is a Jedi Knight? I don't think we ever found that out, right? Yoda tells Luke, "You're not going to be a Jedi Knight until you kill Vader." At one point, I believe, and then no, back up. Tells him in Empire, you haven't completed your training, so you're really not a Jedi Knight. And then I thought he said in Return of the Jedi, you're really not a Jedi Knight or a Jedi Master until you kill Vader. But that seems kind of wrong for a Jedi to become a Master if they're killing people. So what makes a Jedi Knight, and is it a big deal?
So I've seen it done in the animated shows. I've seen it done in the comic books. I've read about it so you're right. It has in other media.
Right,
they've actually focused on it. I think the closest in this medium has been animation, but they've never done it in the live action. To your point, how I understand it is, again, you are a Padawan. You learn the lessons of again, letting go of attachments and being mindful of the living force, et cetera, all the things we've seen.
Midichlorians, yeah.
Midichlorians, yes, a lot of midichlorians. And then at a certain point, whether by heroic deed or act, I mean, it is kind of, there's not a true, like, okay, you've done all this checklist, you're now a Jedi Knight. But it's for the Master to basically say, you're ready to go out into the larger world. And make no mistake, Ahsoka is basically a Jedi Knight in everything but name. I mean, in terms of how she approaches the Force and how she approaches others, and her willingness to use strength when necessary, but also compassion and humanity, and so forth. But I just think like I say, it's one of those fan things that, you would beat up somebody at Comic-Con if they were like, but don't call her a Jedi Knight because she's not a Jedi. I mean, she is, but she just never went through the ritual, which is much like the Arthurian as you imagine it. I mean, they tap him on the shoulders and they say, rise, Jedi Knight. And it's exactly what you imagine it to be. In fact, Obi-Wan referenced in Phantom Menace, I'm ready for the trials, like, you have to do certain things in order for them to say, okay, you're ready. And I believe because of how Obi-Wan performed at Naboo, I think that's when Yoda basically makes him a knight. There's not really a ceremony to it, but then he's allowed to train Anakin as his Padawan, et cetera, et cetera. So they've always been kind of like, wink, wink as to all of that. Ryan Johnson threw a spanner into it all when he had stable boys using the Force at the end of The Last Jedi, suggesting that, it's not just a single family's dynastic rule, that there's a lot of potential Force users out there. And that leads us to where part of the show is going to be exciting with Sabine, because she was not Anakin. She's not the chosen one. She wasn't discovered as Ahsoka was nearly at birth as being strong with the Force. In fact, she's very limited in her ability. Go on.
Right. Well, so that was the question I was going to propose to the two of you, because I'm trying to figure out if I have an issue with it or not, because I'm not 100% sure. In Rogue One, we see someone who's Force sensitive,
Right.
and I'm losing. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. And now, there was this thought that Finn was Force sensitive, and then I think they kind of went away from that though, because they couldn't get one writer to write it all, and then screwed up that whole storyline. That's another podcast for us, Graying Jedi. And now they're saying Sabine is Force sensitive, and she goes up against a Sith apprentice and holds her own pretty well, then takes a slice-a-roo through the gut, and my Qui-Gon Jinn, I have a special set of skills, right? That guy dies. He dies. Game over. You're stewed, buttwad, like this whole thing. She lives. So, number one, is Force sensitive a bad thing or a good thing? Urza Master. And I'm gonna have I'm gonna make another question point after this. Go, Urza.
I think it's stupid. Okay.
All right.
I'm going to be on this bandwagon here. The whole idea of Force sensitive is just so dumb. The whole midi-chlorian thing is dumb. I've always thought it was way more impactful when the Force was just something you could naturally be trained up to recognize. It flows through us. It unites us all. It's in all things. Some may be more adept by birth because they're the chosen one, and or maybe they're part of a race like the foundlings who are just naturally better with the Force because they've evolved in some way. There's so many better ways they could develop this. The whole idea of being like Force sensitive, that means there's like Force resistant people too. Like, you're just too dumb to use the Force, you know what I mean? But then it's like, why is it, you have this Force thing, right? Which is, it triumphs over all machination. That's the whole thing, is like this natural, supernatural Force triumphs over, machinery, more machine than man at this point. All of that happens, right? And now we get, potentially all these other like weird villains that are like, oh, there's a witch, and it's like, really? And then there's like a whole other galaxy which seems to go all the way against Star Wars.
There's a reason for that. I got theories on this. I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize. Keep going.
No, so like I don't know. There's a big slice of cheese in here, and don't get me wrong. I enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed all of these Star Wars things, but there are little things that just kind of get on my nerves, and it's like, really, like you had to come across with some new thing, like I think of Joseph Campbell because that's where Star Wars basically grew out of. I mean, you think about like the legends of the samurai and Bushido kind of theory and the way they view the world. That is like absolutely central to Jedi-dom, and I feel like we've really gotten away with that, or gotten away from that in a way where Ahsoka.
You did it. Good job.
Ahsoka seems to kind of bring us back to that more Bushido, Ronin type Jedi storyline. Now, don't get me wrong. I like Sabine. I love her as a character.
She's
I
pretty.
think she's absolutely gorgeous.
Who don't
And
you
I
think is
think
gorgeous?
her acting is actually pretty impeccable.
It is.
And for her to be a Padawan, she's playing it very well. You know, sort of this, you know, like, oh, she dropped me as a Padawan. I'm a little chippy about that, but I still respect my master. And, you know, deep down, I mean, you can see it play out on her face. Like, deep down, she wants to complete her training, wants to do the right thing. I love that. The struggle of good and evil in the acting and in the character portrayal is absolutely fabulous. I applaud. The whole cast is actually really good. It's just some of the writing, like they're dealing with a bit of a chip on their shoulder because you get, shall we say, the prequel curses that kind of show through it. I'm like, can we just like rein this back in to a much more 456 style Force and Jedi? That's what I want to see.
Well, I'm sorry, Jedi Psyllium Maas. I got to take this back for a second.
Go ahead.
That we've had this discussion before, and I'm going to say this multiple times. That was the beautiful thing that made Star Trek different from Star Wars. Star Wars had the mysticism. Being a Jedi was a mystic thing, right? The magic, understanding the Force. Only certain people could do it. So I know Jedi Psyllium Maas always thinks that I'm going after the Phantom Menace because this is pod racing. That's just a slight issue. My other issue is you threw in the midichlorian thing, which throws all the mysticism away. You made it science. Star Wars is not about the science. Star Trek's about the science. That's what's beautiful about Star Trek. They explain every little thing, and I think the writers, and again, you could probably speak to this better, are probably researching these things, and they want them to be as scientifically accurate as possible. Not just that I made the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, and you just totally screwed that up because a parsec is a length, not a speed. That's a whole nother story. So I think that's part of it, right? It takes the mysticism out of it, and that's why I struggle with it. Urza, to your point, and then Jedi Psyllium Maas, I'm going to give it back to you. I think all these things, my friend, I have a very bold prediction whenever either one of you will allow me to share it. This is going in a certain direction. All of it. I think it's all going in a direction. I have a very wild and wacky theory I'm going to throw out there once you guys let me. So, Jedi Psyllium. Yes or no to Force sensitiveness?
Well, and I'll take a counter prevailing argument on that, again, based on all the lore that I've seen. I think where and now let's take a step back and see what kind of Star Wars stories we're telling. I think Rogue One, for the visualists, and then a lot of their books, in fact, the book series I'm reading now of Star Wars is like that, and Andor, that was about people that don't have any connection to the Force at all. In fact, many of them have never heard of the Jedi or the Force or so forth. And they're just citizens in this galactic rebellion and so forth. And they're just trying to push their heads down and get through the day through, fascism and rebellion and so on and so forth. And I think that's something George Lucas wanted to explore more had he had the inclination and the time, perhaps. But he got, he was first and foremost sort of felt an obligation to tell this story of the Skywalker clan. The middle three going first, and then the backstory, and then, several of his ideas were, let's say, adapted for the sequel trilogy. They weren't his direct ideas, but he had some ideas for what 7, 8, and 9 would look like, and they went and ran with some of them and changed and altered others of them, et cetera, et cetera. But so you have sort of the mysticism of the Force, which was always part of his recipe. It was always about how religion and myth and legend was supposed to rise up and inspire people, as well as the metaphor of the little guys with the sticks are beating the big guys with technology. I saw a documentary about ILM and the special effects company Lucas built to make these films, as well as become a leader in the industry. And they said that if you look at TIE fighters and Star Destroyers and Imperial technology, it's all right off the factory fresh. It's all the best parts and the gleaming metal, and it's the height of what you can afford in terms of infrastructure. And the rebellion, especially in the first trilogy. I mean, the Millennium Falcon and the X-Wings, they're held together with spit and chewing wire, and they're like custom hot rods that you built in your garage, you know.
What a piece of junk.
Right, scavenging parts, and it's got the engine of this, and it's got, you know, the deflector shields of that, and the rebellion was scrappy.
That's a great point.
And so it was this idea that the technology, you know, represented sort of the dark side, was being undercut by the people with ingenuity and imagination and so forth. Even more so than this whole mysticism, you know, light side, dark side bit. That's kind of where the visual clues were going. I have an advantage, and I think both of your opinions, I'm grateful to hear them, you know, as from people who are coming in from, you know, where you are coming in from in the universe, because I've spent a lot of time with Sabine and Hera and her droid Chopper, who makes a extended appearance in episode 2 there. And I love Chopper. In fact, my social media page, that's the top of my social media page. I have no pictures of me, but I have a big picture of Chopper from Star Wars Celebration. For me, like, I want to see Sabine. I want to know more about this, you know, what can she learn? Because as I said, she's not Luke Skywalker. She's not Anakin Skywalker. She's going to have to find her way on her own. And I think that first battle we see at the end of episode 1 that shocked Urza, I was shocked too. I'm like, oh my God, they didn't just kill Sabine. But I've spent 8 years with her, right? I mean, I've seen her in other mediums and read about her and all that. So for me, it was like doubly like, oh my gosh. And then, of course, I thought, well, wait a minute. Bacta, obviously, that's how they're going to fix this. And they did. But she won that, or she had that fight to a draw, Lord Uther, just because of raw physical talent and skill. And you've seen that I mean, she learns how to use the Darksaber, which you'll remember from The Mandalorian. She's a Mandalorian, and there are storylines where she had the Darksaber, and that's where she learned how to fight with a you know, a laser sword, if you will. Now, they don't need to go into that for this show, but that's part of that backstory that makes sense there. And I love, there's a moment I want to separate out in that duel, because again, we've seen lightsaber duels throughout our lives. The Dark Apprentice has her down on the ground with the saber right by her, and Sabine like catches herself with like one hand, and she's almost like a gymnast. And she's like holding off this lightsaber attack while balancing off the ground. It's the most ridiculous, in a great way, like, you know, like a dance pose or gymnastics or just pure athleticism. And I don't know. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but I absolutely loved seeing that. And it's just kind of like, it just told me a lot about her character just in her physical form and how she was able to do that. That she was just kind of improvising, like, et cetera, et cetera. So, like I said, there were. I come to this show, you know, with the Easter eggs. You guys have done the same thing, I'm sure, or will have done the same thing with me when we've done Star Treks and things. And I'm like, well, who's Gary Mitchell? You're ha ha ha. You know, you don't know who Harry Mudd is? Ha ha. I mean, yes, there are things that I will not pick up on until we start our run through the original series, which will be quite soon, in fact. But Clancy Brown made a brief appearance in this as the governor of Lothal, giving a speech to the population. And not only did I know that the planet was named Lothal when it came on, but Clancy Brown voiced that character in Rebels. So I'm like, oh my gosh, look, they got Clancy Brown to do.
He does a lot of that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and he's appeared in The Mandalorian before, and he was Darth Maul's older brother in the Clone Wars animated show. Yeah. So he's actually a fan. And again, things with Chopper and the fact that the ship that Hera was flying to put the tracing device on the hyperdrive, that's from Star Wars Rebels. Like, I'm like, oh, look, it's the Phantom. So as we go through this show, I'm going to geek out because I'm going to be like, oh, da-da-da. But I think it's even more valuable to hear you guys do it because, like I said, you're not going to sit there and say, oh, look at that ship. I recognize it. Or they referenced a planet that I remember from the comic books. Like it's going to be more, I think you guys are going to call it straight, no bull. And I think that's what it is there. What I wanted to talk to you about in terms of the direct Star Trek, though, let's take Strange New Worlds just because it's our recent touch point. We praised the writing team and the writing staff on that show endlessly, and with good reason, because they're approaching this as a television show and the episodic nature of a television show, and it allows them to have the freedom to experiment, right? To do a musical episode, to do an episode with broad comic strokes, to do a very dark episode about PTSD, to do a mainstream adventure serial, with a cliffhanger, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, to me, I'm a fan of great television, great storytelling, et cetera. So for me, I don't think one approach necessarily favors the other, but I think it does put Star Wars at a little bit of a disadvantage because when we're talking about legend, lore, and myth, there's not the same opportunity. This show is really an 8-episode movie, told in various 30 to 40-minute chunks. Whereas, like I say, Star Trek is a more traditional, at least Star Trek Strange New Worlds, is a more traditional episodic show that has maybe some plot threads and emotional threads interconnected, but is also telling individual stories. The closest this would come to is what Picard was doing, which were season-long arcs that generally moved forward and told a story. So I guess what I'm saying, using both Star Trek and Star Wars as your example, do you guys get more of a kinetic thrill each week getting a different meal? Or do you like the long-form storytelling that can stretch out over, 6, 8, 10 episodes, but there is no break, there is no opportunity for improvisation or experimentation. It's just, we're going to tell, this narrative, and there'll be plot twists and surprises along the way, but, you're not going to get those sporadic moments of, oh my gosh, I can't believe they took that chance. So I'm just curious as television viewers. I mean, again, even if you kept it in the Star Trek family and compared Picard to Strange New Worlds, which ones do you actually enjoy more? Sort of the Strange New Worlds model or something more along these lines, the serialized model?
That's a tough one, frankly, because of course, with sci-fi, you get both, right? Every sci-fi series does one or the other or a combination. I think of Stargate, which had lots of standalone episodes, but had a lot of interconnected arcs, or X-Files, where you had a lot of Monsters of the Week, and then you had your canon episodes, and they were very much, kind of intertwined, and then you have the movies that play in. I really like both, honestly, and I think Marvel's done a nice job of this too, because I'm watching Secret Invasion at the same time as Ahsoka, because frankly they, kind of play well together, I think. You get a little bit of the sci-fi, you get a little more of the realism sci-fi versus the sort of far, far away. I found that to be a nice contrast, but there's something to be said about that traditional interconnected crew story arc telling versus the single plot driven, multi-episode movie. Because you think about the original trilogy or even the follow-up trilogies of Star Wars, those movies are pretty disconnected and stand alone pretty well, which is fantastic writing, first and foremost. But also kind of left it to where, if the first one or two or even the first three didn't get to be as popular as they did, they were fine on their own. They had just enough exposition, and that's where, I think Ahsoka is doing a nice job standing on its own exposition-wise. We know the Star Wars galaxy well enough that anything they do is going to be accessible to your most casual viewer, right? So I admire that. I feel like if they tried to do standalone episodes, which in some respects The Mandalorian sort of does,
It is,
there's
yeah.
one ongoing thread, but those episodes are all kind of their own thing. I think either one works. To be honest, I think it all comes down to, is the overall story Is that something compelling, or is this just a way to fill in some blank spaces? And that's where I was a little skeptical of shows like Rebels, because it felt very like we need to fill some blank spaces so that people have something to refer back to. And that's where I feel like Star Wars loses a lot of its magic. The fun part about the original trilogy is there's a lot left unsaid. So you could really speculate. And, you know, who doesn't love good fan fiction? But even shows that kind of, you know, burn every bridge, like Supernatural, there's still enough left unsaid that it's still compelling television or compelling, you know, writing. What I do like about Ahsoka so far, and I think is going to be the strength of it, even though it is an 8-episode movie, is much of it stands on its own. It's very removed from what we're getting in The Mandalorian. It's very removed. I mean, it's loosely connected, because of course it is. But it's removed enough that, like, if all you watched was Ahsoka and you didn't watch anything else from Star Wars, you're probably going to enjoy it. And if it stays up, you know, I think that'll be fine. I mean, at worst, it's probably just going to be an okay Star Wars series. Why I like stuff like Andor and Rogue One is that anything that's brave enough to do something without a Jedi, automatic win in my book, if it's Star Wars. Like, just to get away from the convenience of the Force in some ways, because, you know, there are certain things that you know just aren't going to happen. We knew that Obi-Wan was not going to kill Darth Vader in Kenobi, and vice versa. That didn't make that fight any less compelling, and that was probably one of the most magical cinematic moments I think we've gotten in the last 50 years. But, that being said, it kind of steals the fun a little bit. And that's where Strange New Worlds, like, they've somehow managed to preserve the fun, despite the fact we know how this ends. So that's, you know, I don't have a preference, is kind of the long roundabout I'm going at here. But I think what they're doing well. And I think as long as you execute, like Picard's the same way. They executed Picard brilliantly. All 3 seasons. You know, season 3 I think being the best, but all 3 seasons were very well done. Could you build in a hybrid like a Stargate series does, where you get a few canon episodes, sometimes a few in a row? Yeah, I'd love to see that. As a matter of fact, that's what I'm hoping that Star Trek Legacy does, where you get a few canon episodes and then a few offshoots, so it's fresh, but you're still on that story, and then some of the related stories can maybe eventually build out from your core crew to a greater enterprise. That's just...
Saw what you did there.
So, great points by both of you. Great question. I'm going to start, because it's on my mind right now. Great point about trying to have a show without a Jedi, and it's successful. That's such a leap of faith, because it's like Star Trek, because if you don't have a show without an Enterprise, I think that's what made DS9 and Voyager struggle at times. And it hit me out of nowhere. What did they do at the end of the Picard Season 3? They made the Titan the Enterprise. So I do think to have a show... by the way, I'm really starting to get into DS9 now with all these shows that are popping up on Pluto for DS9.
So good.
I'm getting sold on it. But I think it's a tall task. I think that's one reason I don't like Voyager. It's not the Enterprise. I think that's a big complaint. And so you better have great writing.
Hakuchi Moya.
Same thing. Yeah, same thing with, you know, Star Wars. You better have good writing
Cap.
for if you're not going to have Jedi in it. And/or Rogue One. That's what made them so good. Here's the problem with the Star Wars formula versus the Star Trek formula. I'm just going to say they're two different things. So I guess I'm taking it from a different perspective. With the Star Wars formula, if something starts to fail, it's over. Book of Boba Fett. I'm gonna keep going after that. Season 3 of The Mandalorian has struggled a little bit, right? The only saving grace from Book of Boba Fett, in my opinion, was the episode with Grogu and Ahsoka. Like, that was the only piece of that Book of Boba Fett I liked, and that's why I think Ahsoka is giving it some hope. So, where if you have a Star Trek episodic, you could pivot real quick if you have to, and you can still make it okay with a couple of great episodes, you know. And so that's my view on that. But I just want to go. I'm sorry, I'm a little stuck on my whole idea of force sensitive. Lucasfilm or whoever is in charge of this, let me fix it for you. If you just would have treated it like that kooky old religion in our original Star Wars movie, A New Hope, and all these people, instead of being force sensitive, they followed the religion, so they would train on their own, they would kind of worship it on their own, and maybe they got some of the skill from that. I could live with that a lot better than, I might be force sensitive. Well, maybe you're force sensitive. Oh, you're not? Oh, well, there's a chance where I think if you follow the kooky old religion idea, which was set up perfectly in A New Hope, oh, I worship that. I follow that. I've trained in that. That's why I have some skill. Some. Okay, I'll close the door on that. And I'm going to have one more question whenever.
I think I can express it even better than just more of a personal preference here. Star Trek was a small screen production to begin with. It was born on TV and later expanded its views to the feature world, the silver screen, and then made a triumphant return back to the small screen in the new incarnation. Star Wars was born on the big screen and then migrated over into the streaming world, in the last 4 years. And I don't know in terms of what service, I watch the Paramount Plus and the Disney Plus. When I watch Paramount Plus and I see I have no ads for my, feed, but even so, there are brief pauses, right? There's like for a 2 or 3 second pause where an ad should go, and instead my screen goes dark for a second and then we resume the action. And the thing is, Star Trek has always been written as a television show. There's act breaks, right? There's 4 acts in a television script, as well as a prologue and possibly an epilogue and so forth. And so when you're watching a Star Trek show, right before the ads is when the big moments come. The shields are failing, Captain. What do we do? Cut. Come back out of commercial. The shields are failing, Captain. Quick, move everything from life support to... And when you're watching a Star Trek episode, you can feel subconsciously or consciously the beats of a television show as they steer you towards these various points. With Star Wars, for example, there are no act breaks, right? At least, Disney Plus, at least for me, there are no commercials. They may offer that service now. But it's 40 minutes straight on, again, like a feature, like a cinema. And so the rhythms of the episode are just different. You're not being subconsciously pushed towards, it's like if you were charting it like an EKG, at each act break, we reach the zenith and then we have to bring it back down a little and then rise back up again and so forth. Whereas, like I say, with Andor or Obi-Wan or anything else, we come out of credits and we roll for 40 minutes and then there's the credits and we'll see you next week. And so subconsciously, it's a different viewing experience. Writing for TV and knowing what the limitations and where you can play with it versus, again, writing this sort of single voice narrative. I think that's an interesting thing to consider in terms of how it just affects us as viewers. I also want to say that if you had never seen Ahsoka in animation and you'd never seen her in The Mandalorian or whatever, I thought her introduction in episode 1, igniting her sabers and cutting a hole in the earth to drop down and do the whole Raiders of the Lost Ark discovery of the mass. But I just thought from a long shot of this character who we haven't seen yet, igniting the white lightsabers, spinning them in a corkscrew like motion and then just falling. I'm like, that's about as badass as you can get, like in terms of just the explanation. I also want to point out the commander of the Rebel prison ship. And by the way, Rebel prison ships, if you've followed The Mandalorian and other shows, they're absolutely terrible on security because they're always getting invaded and the guards are always getting wiped out. I mean, Moff Gideon was spirited away, under Rebel security, and season 1 of The Mandalorian, they broke a guy out of prison and killed the crew. I mean, if you want to get out of jail fast, get the New Republic to arrest you, and you should be good to go. But in any event, the captain who ends up getting impaled by Balin's orange light blade, that actor is named Mark Ralston, and that's not a name that's going to leap to your tongue, but he was his most significant role, and he's been working for years, was Vasquez's partner Drake in Aliens, as in they snuck the ammunition into their guns. And, Drake, we are leaving. And, he's also the man that held Bill Paxton hostage while Lance Henriksen ran the knife between his fingers in the mess hall. So, again, great character actor. He's been 30, 40 years of television and bit parts in films. And I didn't recognize him. I had to look it up. But his voice, there was something about his voice as the commander of the New Republic ship. And sure enough, that's him. And I'm like, oh, good for you, Mark. That's a great role there to have for you, even in this age. So, anyways.
So good to see him.
I know. You got to love that, those working actors. And that reminds us to stay in solidarity with SAG-AFTRA and the WGA, whose toils continue on the picket lines there. But I wanted to introduce to our group here a feature for our Graying Jedi podcast called Ask the Jedi Council, in which, and we've already covered a lot of ground this week just with these first 2 episodes, but the opportunity to put it amongst this distinguished panel, some thoughts and queries, sort of a quick round robin on, as you will. And so I had the first thought that we could throw out there to our Graying Jedi this week. Of all the Star Wars eras that you're familiar with or have been exposed to, whether by video game or book or comic book or movie or animated show, which era is your favorite in terms of where they tell their stories? That is to say, the prequel era of the Old Republic, the Rise of the Rebellion era, in between episodes 3 and 4 and through the Return of the Jedi, this new era that we're exploring now, post Return of the Jedi, with the new Republic taking stand, only to be challenged by the First Order. It's not even so much like which is your favorite in terms of, well, I like these movies in there and those things in there, but which one has the most potential for stories, the longest runway in which you're the most excited about? Is it Imperial stormtroopers? Is it, Sith apprentices? Is it something new that we're now experiencing? So I'm just curious what your favorite era of Star Wars storytelling is. Lord Uther.
Now I can share my prediction because I'm going to say it's the future, and here's why. Sabine will become the ruler of Mandalore. Take that. Them mentioning another galaxy, I think you're going to see the new Star Wars movies, because I know this is before the new Star Wars movies. I get that. I think with some good writing, you could propel some of these characters forward to the new movies that are going to come out with Rey. I think we're going to see, and I'm going to say the first part of it wrong, an Uzan Vong invasion. I think that's going to be the next 3 movies, and Rey's going to have to fight some of that. And I think you're going to see Mandalore involved. I think you're going to see Ahsoka involved in that later on, because I think that whatever species she is, she lives for a long time. Is that right? Kind of like a Yoda type?
Yes.
Or a little bit longer. I think my prediction, I'm gonna be Urza Master, like I'm in the Star Trek writing room, but I'm not as good as Urza. But my prediction right now, this is all pointing to the new movies, and that we are going to see a guy by the name of Timothy Zahn that should get a lot more talk, who's had the guts to have the sequel books that brought about Grand Admiral Thrawn. And then, oh no, that was Ari Salvatore, but Timothy Zahn had something to do with that too. But the Uzan Vong thing, I'm saying the word wrong, I think. But I think it's going in that direction. Obviously, you're not going to see Luke Skywalker. I think Ezra is going to be the Luke Skywalker with Rey of the next 3 films. You take that, Lucasfilm. I'm available. My phone number is 815. Just reach out to me through pending rebrand. I'm here for you.
Love it.
Oh, that is a bold prediction.
You bet it is.
I do think that the future has the most track to run in terms of storytelling. Now, is it my favorite? No. My favorite would be the Old Republic. I want to know more about how Sidious rose to power and all of the stories from before, from the early days of the Jedi and the Sith, and how they put down the other greater threats in the galaxy and or from beyond the galaxy, beyond the Outer Rim, that have entered into myth and legend as we get to the Star Wars we know and love. I think that has a lot of potential and could be very interesting. But I also like the idea of the future, and I think Lord Uther's idea is a fantastic one. I am in full support of them building this towards these new movies. I think the biggest issue that will arise, I'm not going to say it could because I'm sure it will, is can they employ a steady writing staff to get it done? And I don't think they can. I also don't think they're going to be able to retain a director to direct 3 movies in a row. I don't think they're going to want to spend the money. I don't think they're going to want to take the risk. Unless Michael Bay decides he wants to direct Star Wars movies on the cheap. But I really think Star Wars has always been thin ice. I think you have a very large opportunity to fail and a much narrower opportunity to succeed. I think the only way this can work is if somehow these characters that we've come to know and love from these streaming shows unite in the next trilogy of movies, if it is to be a trilogy, and form some kind of motley crew. And I would have preferred if that motley crew was led by the last surviving member, Han Solo. Obviously, that can't happen. But I think Chewbacca is the one that could probably tie the leads together. I know you have Rey, and that's all well and good. I didn't care for Finn's character. I also didn't care for
Me either.
Moon Knight's character in the movies.
Oh, Cameron.
I agree.
To be honest, the latest 3 movies were below expectations for me, and I enjoyed them. I did. I liked them. But they were below expectations. I think they could really reset the bar much, much higher if you build in a Grogu, a Mandalorian, an Ahsoka, a Sabine. I forget the name of the green gal who's very attractive as well.
General
I'd love to see her in that movie.
Hera
Yes,
Syndulla.
thank you. I really, truly believe that you need the organic, grassroots, salt-of-the-earth people movement that you had with the original rebellion. I think this invasion force has to unite the old empire with the old republic and the farmers that make it all happen. You have to have some kind of unifying force come in and be the antagonist. Otherwise, none of this will work. None of it will work.
Because you can't bring the Empire back again. You can't bring Palpatine back again. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but...
No, that's exactly what I was going to say.
That's the whole thing. I didn't mean to cut you off, which is why I love the idea of the Vong being a part of this, because it's something that people can reference that have read the books. I apologize I cut you off 100%. I'm sorry.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's because if you bring back Thrawn only to bring back the Empire and rehash the same goddamn storyline, excuse my language, it's going to alienate every single fan out there. Now, there's going to be some weirdo hardcoreists that love it. But where I got off to a bad taste in my mouth with Ahsoka, and I really enjoyed the first 2 episodes. I will get to our rating shortly here. Where it left me with a bad taste is the introduction was a rehash of much of what we've seen with Star Wars to date. It was all A New Hope again. It was almost shot for shot the opening sequence, a lot of it. With the invading the rebel ship, which has the worst security on Earth, just as bad and as sally as the stormtroopers. It felt very oh no. But then we got something very compelling afterwards, and I was very pleasantly surprised. So, all that being said, I really hope they continue in that direction, and I hope that was just a nod to, hey, we're not going to do that. Because if that continues, I will be very delighted.
I got to throw one more question out there before we rate this. Just one more question.
Go.
There was a quote that bothers me a lot, but actually is one of my bigger issues again. And Urza's smiling already, so I think he knows where I'm going. The quote was, and this was about Ahsoka and Balin, is that his name?
Balin, yeah.
He said, I really don't want to kill her. There are so few Jedi left. Well, let me tell you something. I've heard that line before, and it turned out that a whole bunch of Jedi survived Order 66, or just kind of all around the galaxy, and that was my other slight issue, is this idea that Jedi. I thought, we were kind of told in 4, 5, and 6 that Vader, any Jedi that were left, Vader had hunted down, which, by the way, if you were going to make the prequel movies, it should have been that. When you go to make the Darth Vader series, it better be about that. But the problem with that now is we know that a whole bunch of Jedi survived anyway. So that's my issue. So I apologize. I'm ranting a little bit. Let's go back to the point. And Urza,
I just want to hop on that, though.
Foaming at the mouth.
I got to hop on this. This is the magic of Graying Jedi. We're all angry old men with our opinions.
Yeah, I don't like this show.
I remember when that Tatooine was a gas station.
Kenobi was 55. Go ahead.
So I'm also frustrated by that same point. However, I know Disney is not going to make the Vader series they should, because they're Disney. They're not going to make an emotionally complex Vader kills a bunch of people show. It's just not going to happen. There has to be some kind of redemption arc, some kind of moral ambiguity. It has to somehow have a silver lining, because American audiences can't handle complex stories. That's why nobody in this country likes to read Bukowski. Like, they are not going to give us the Vader we want. We want the villainous, genocidal maniac who's trying so hard to kill his master because he doesn't want to be reminded that he has a conscience. That is what I want to see. I want to see that Vader, that scary Vader that came through ever so briefly in Kenobi, but was like, holy shit, this is what we want. This is the scary-ass Vader that we need to have. They're not going to do it, because that won't sell toys. That won't sell tickets to theme parks. That won't sell people on Disney Plus. It's just not going to. They're not going to make an R-rated series about Vader. They absolutely should. Ryan Reynolds could write it, and it would be fantastic. But they're not going to do it. They don't have the guts to do what Marvel will do, because Marvel knows you can make a gory, violent, horrific film and just inject enough goofiness to make it palatable for the audiences they're trying to really market to. So that's just my 2 cents. We're not going to get it. So don't get your hopes up.
Okay, real quick. Based on where Lucasfilm is now, and everything is subject to change, they announced 3 movies at their most recent Star Wars celebration overseas in London. It will not be, by definition, a connected trilogy like we've come to expect in the past. However, how intertwined at least 2 of them may be is still sort of a subject of conjecture. The first and most ambitious one is going to go back, 10,000 years before anything we've seen, and literally is supposed to detail the birth of the Force. So, and the director, James Mangold, he said he wants to do his Ben-Hur of Star Wars. He wants to do the chariots and swords and gladiators of Star Wars, but at the beginning, where it all started, before Jedi and Sith even. So that's a very blue sky project, and we'll have to wait and see. They announced that Rey would be coming back to try and rebuild a Jedi Order following the events of The Rise of Skywalker. What that entails in terms of an opponent, an adversary, in terms of allies, will Finn be coming back, or Poe, or any of these other characters you've mentioned? We don't know. They're keeping that close to the vest, but it will be a sequel to Rise of Skywalker in the sense that it takes place after those events and charts it out. The most intriguing of them is the Dave Filoni project, in which he is tasked to direct and co-write. I believe Jon Favreau, who's the Mandalorian shepherd, he will be working on it with Filoni. And their project is allegedly, it's all of these characters that we've seen and have yet to see. It's Mando and Grogu, it's Ahsoka, it's Sabine, it's the characters in the upcoming Skeleton Crew with Jude Law. That's another Star Wars series that'll be premiering next year. It's Boba Fett. Jude Law will be a starship captain. So it's all of these characters sharing this, much like Marvel did with their Avengers. It's all these characters who kind of share the same timeline and same worlds in a big, universe-defining challenge. And I think, Lord Uther, you're not the first one who has mentioned that alien race. And so you might be onto something. But nothing has been written in stone, and there's still a lot of ground between here and there. But your theory has as much credence as any of them. And so when you're watching this show going forward, not only are you hopefully enjoying it in the moment, but you might be trying to start to spot threads that they're going to elongate into this big, again, bringing our heroes together for Age of Ultron and Endgame.
Star Wars Avengers.
Right. I mean, more or less. That's what they've said they want to do. So we'll see, how they get there and if they're successful, et cetera, et cetera. But like I said before, love it or hate it, or find you're somewhere in between. This is Dave Filoni. He created this character of Ahsoka, and we've seen all of her evolution. If you watch her in the beginning of the Clone Wars, she's very much a young Anakin in Episode 1. If you watch her in Rebels, she's very much Luke Skywalker embracing his destiny from Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi. And when you watch her now, she is the wise Jedi of Alec Guinness and Qui-Gon Jinn. She's very zen. She has few words. She speaks very calmly. When she's pushed into action, she's a beast. But she's very much that stately, wise Jedi, the final evolution of that character. So love it or leave it, it's Dave. Now, Urza Master, I just, because we're just doing this for the first time, if you would allow me to introduce our idea of how to rate them, and then we can proceed there. We always like
Absolutely.
to give our shows a badge of excellence or needs improvement. And in Star Trek, we rate this by the number of warp cores that each episode earns on its own merits. And oftentimes, they are at the high end of that spectrum. We thought we'd do a little something different here at the Graying Jedi because it's the lightsaber being the ubiquitous weapon of choice, an elegant weapon for a more civilized era. But also, the lightsaber and the kyber crystals within it tell a lot about the individual. So in this case, going forward, when we're doing our Star Wars shows, we will reach into the inner workings of a lightsaber, and we will grade our episodes based on what hue they represent for us. So if we found the episode to be satisfactory, without any major demerits or outstanding achievements, that feels like a nice, safe blue lightsaber for a Jedi. If we found the episode to be exceptional and reaching beyond all expectations, then I might suggest a green lightsaber for those truly prized Jedi at the highest peak of their powers. And if we found that the episode was lacking slipshod writing or narrative dead ends or leaning into the worst cliches, then we might go with a red lightsaber because red equals the dark side and the dark side is bad. So blue, green, and red being our spectrum, I will go first as the fanboy. And I admit going forward that I am biased given the relationship I have with the franchise and its lore. I found these first two episodes for this viewer to be a bright emerald green. It is not easy to thread the needle between giving the audience what they expect versus what they don't know. And we've covered this before in this episode. I think Dave Filoni threaded that needle like driving a pod racer through the canyons of Beggar's Canyon in episode 1. He dodged all the obstacles. There were no flameouts, no crashes, and he pulled it across the finish line with aplomb. And I just look forward to it. The best thing about this race is you have to get back on and keep going. So I hope he can, steer the course and do wonders. But for me, to see Chopper and Hera and great lightsaber duels and a very, very good-looking cast, top to bottom, I'm going to go green for these first 2 episodes of Ahsoka.
Oh, I am going to go. I'm trying to combine blue and green and figure out the color.
Is that purple?
Is that turquoise?
Right.
Purple? Okay, I'll go purple. See, to me, purple, though, is like top of the line, Mace Windu. I'm going to cut you up. But that's fine. I'll go purple. The potential is there. I feel like, and we kind of talk about this with Star Trek sometimes, these 2 episodes should be the getting to know you. This is what's going to, like getting to know the crew a little bit. And then now I'm expecting for it to jump to light speed.
Nice.
And move forward with the last 6 episodes. So I'm going to go purple. I'm going to go potential purple.
Excellent.
I love it. I was actually thinking about purple as well.
Of course
I was going to say,
you were.
I look at this as Mace Windu. It's a cut above your average Jedi.
Yes.
It's not quite Luke Skywalker. I agree. I loved this double episode opener. I really did. I had quite a few hesitations and a couple of problems, so I'm not going to give it a green, but I think there's a lot of potential. I think this cast is compelling. It's great acting. It's good writing. I really am curious to see more of these Darksiders. That's kind of what I think was the most compelling part for me. But yeah, I think it was a very solid debut across the board. This is what I expected. I did not expect to be wowed, but I also didn't expect to be disappointed. So it was better than just meeting my expectations. So I'll give it a cut above, but not quite tippy top. With that, now that we've ventured into a galaxy far, far away, I invite all of you here at Pending Rebrand on YouTube or wherever you're getting your fine podcasts to join us as we continue exploring this galaxy far, far away, even if it may not be a long, long time ago. And we didn't talk about the kitties, but they have a floofy little animal, which I thought I was going to hate. But I didn't. And we'll leave that for next episode of The Graying Jedi.